Chris gently reminded me of noting. Never mind. We're out here now. So we've got the annual plan over to the Chief Finance Officer. Chris, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, obviously, planning guidance is awaited. You know, we would ordinarily not have received it by now. We haven't received it. It is rather formally late. We had planning guidance right at the end of March for the current financial year. But it's still very important, of course, that we base our plans on what we know. We must start planning now. So this really is an update for the board on the approach rather than that seeking the board to approve the process. So, and of course, this has been discussed at Finance and Performance Committee. So just from the just a couple of points to raise. So commissioning intentions letter, which will of course inform our plans, has been received, but really that was more of a statement of intent and a launch of the process to follow. The trust did respond to that commissioning intentions letter formally, and that's also been to the Finance Performance Committee. The next stage really is that the Integrated Care Board team will consolidate the provider feedback. I haven't seen consolidated feedback, but I do. But providers have shared with each other their responses. There will be further development now through engagement between providers and the ICB, leading up to a timetable that leads up to about February. One thing we've asked for is that we're explicitly clear about how the process will align the development and commissioning intentions with financial planning, the new any new financial framework for next year, and the contractual processes. So I'm expecting to see that next. I think there is a paper that will be going to the ICB board setting out the way forward on a system level. I think at that point we'll need to provide a more substantive update to the board and set out what our process will be to meet those things. We're working with teams across the trust now to discuss our planning approach and ensure that we have a well documented, consistently documented baseline. Really important we get our baseline right. We're looking at how we might adapt our previous approaches in that regard. The planning timetable is set out through to the end of March, so board members can be clear about what to expect and when, and there's a lot of detail about that timetable and interactions with the individual teams across the organisation through to that underpins the summary level that's in the main body of the report. All, of course, will be informed by national system planning guidance when it becomes available and published.
Okay, so in summary, we've got an update around the national planning guidelines which we have to follow every year. Well, it's a little bit late, let's comment. We have to do the plan anyway, so this is the first. It's just an awareness to the board that we are beginning that process, subject to the compliances that Chris has outlined. Any questions? Nicola, then I'll go back. Nicola?
Which corporate team does digital and data come under?
Chief People Officer.
I was thinking in terms of all your digital portfolio. When you're talking about the planning sessions, I was just wondering which one of the different, if you've got finance, you've got estates and facilities, you've got people, you've got corporate governance. Just wondering which.
It's an omission, it should be on that list.
It should be on that.
Yeah. As I3, we would both engage with them.
Okay, so we'll put that on the list. Thank you. Yes, Sharon, Chris. Mike?
Thanks, Chair. And please tell me if this isn't appropriate for here. But on the forward planning last year for this year, and they're not meeting the criteria to reside. When I was a governor, I questioned why we were looking at such a high reduction figure as a main plank of our financial planning that we had never met, and we're not going to get anywhere near now probably. I just want to be sure that we're not going to go through the same process again, because it looks as though that's going to be, if our run rate is out at the end of the year, that's probably going to be one of the main reasons again.
Appropriate, good question.
So This started a few years back where the planning guidance required organisations to plan on 5% of bed stock consumed by patients that don't meet the medical criteria to reside. And then last year, we were working with the ICB and set out our expectation of what our exit run rate would be for 23-24 leading into this year. And we agreed to work jointly with them to achieve this 5%. Now, recognise that hasn't materialised, which is one of the risks that we set out, both in last year's financial report, but also in setting the plan this year, and has continued to therefore be an issue that I've raised as a cause of variance through the year. We have in our intentions letter indicated that we want to have a conversation about potentially zero basing certain assumptions. And I would be looking to engage in a conversation about where we are the system on that and how that be incorporated in the plans. There are a whole series of issues that I think will need to be reflected in our commissioning intentions response when it comes through, not least the fact that this trust has also experienced a 25% increase in residential care activity over the, I think, the last 4 years. So there are a whole series of things that fit with that particular issue that we would need to address through that period. I think we'll have to come back, and when we seek final agreement with the board, probably the assumptions around not meeting criteria to reside be a specific point that we'd love to sign off on.
And it's an interesting process, Mike, so you can come back at each point and highlight that issue.
Just so from my own understanding, there is a risk that even though we've replied to their letter, the ICB will still impose on us.
It's not imposed, it was an expectation of the planning guidance that organisations and systems worked to achieve that.
Clarification.
Yeah, just a point of clarification as well. So the system, if I remember, is kind of like 500 million deficit across the three regions. So that's a pretty movable part. And of course, trusts are at different levels of performance and delivery. I'm just trying to understand the point about it. It is interesting, but at what point in terms of March, because that's when we kind of get to that kind of business plan, how confident do we think we'll be about it being a reasonably clear cut? Because obviously the financial position across the system is going to play a big part in terms of what is or isn't in the expectations list.
My immediate response would be that where we are on those issues, Tony, is a factor of so many moving parts across the system. Our approach, remember, is the way that I set out our financial objectives to have 3 components. Obviously, we've got financial objectives to deliver our financial plan this year, but the second one was to deliver an exit run rate that's consistent with that level, with that position. So at the 31st of March, you end the financial year with a run rate that's consistent with where you need to be for starting the next one. We did promote that as an approach to be adopted across the Provider Collaborative Board last year. I think I will be revisiting that. But I think until we understand really where the system's going to end up, it's difficult to give you assurance about what.
And that was just my point to be helpful, because obviously in a brilliant business planning world, you have a cycle as is laid out here, but obviously that's a huge factor, which is kind of a bit of a moving part, isn't it? So it was just to kind of clarify that we might have to still revise things beyond March.
Not unusual. Okay, we're happy to accept the update.
Yes.
CFO. We look forward to further work on this one. We move on to item 81 then, working in partnerships. PC provider collaboration update. We've got a report. I think it's there.
Yeah.
Just going to suggest take that as read, Chair, and take any questions.
Yeah. It's just a summary. Sarah?
Thank you. Sorry if I missed this in your update earlier on, Chris, actually. I just wanted to acknowledge obviously the transfer for LSE happening on the 1st of November. I know that was mentioned earlier. Just looking for some assurance or reassurance around that process and staff and how that might be impacting on them. Just recognising it's on one level it's a no change, on another level it is just some reassurance.
Do you want me to pick them up? Yeah, so everybody was transferred as planned. We knew that there would be some errors that we would need to fix post transfer and a lot of things that would need to be done manually post transfer. All in all, that has happened. So it transferred as expected. People have been able to access the majority of things that they've needed to. There've been a few minor issues, but nothing that we weren't aware of. Nothing that gives us any concern in terms of being able to make the corrections in advance of first pay. So as far as transfer happened, I think there was a 0.6 or a 0.8% error rate across the entirety of Lancashire and South Cumberland. So for a transfer of that scale, I think it's pretty good going. But yeah, there are still issues that need to be picked up, but the teams are actively working on them. And there's nothing of concern that will give us anything to suggest that there'll be any issues with first payroll run. Thanks, Anne.
Okay, happy to accept the take ends and update. Thanks, Chris. Then over to item 82. Chris Chiswell, welcome, Chris. Good to see you again. You're here to present the Health Inequalities Action Plan. I'll just check before you start that it's gone through the Quality Committee. Any exceptions or escalations to come through on this paper?
No, just to confirm that, yeah, we considered it and very happy to support.
Protocol Chris is the chair of the subcommittee. You might think there's not, but
Sorry.
okay. Over to you.
Lovely, thank you. So good morning. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris Chiswell. I'm the consultant in public health at the Trust, and the Health Inequalities Action Plan is here for approval today. So by way of just short background, each of us builds our health and our well-being on a set of very basic building blocks. So things like access to good education, quality of our housing, whether we have access to meaningful and supportive relationships. And the secret is actually that those things have a more profound impact on our long-term health outcomes than anything that actually happens directly in health care directly. About 70 to 80% of our health outcomes are determined by all of those other things. And when any of those basic building blocks are missing, it is a lot harder to stay healthy. And at its most profound around Morecambe Bay, we see that as a difference of more than 10 years gap in life expectancy between some of the communities that we serve as an organisation. Underneath that, though, we also see big differences in the access, experience and outcomes from all kinds of healthcare. And for our organisation, one of the most obvious ones that would be looking at missed appointments in our organisation, that you're more than twice as likely to miss an appointment if you live in one of the more deprived communities than one of the more affluent communities. And so when we come to talk about our clinical strategy or any other part of the organisation, actually recognising that we serve these very profoundly different groups rather than a single homogenous group is a really important part of us being able to deliver all of the ambitions across the organisation. Now, in my world, we call those gaps health inequalities, essentially. They are the sort of avoidable and unfair systematic gaps that we see between different communities. And we have, as an organisation, both a duty and a strategy to respond to health inequalities. The duty part of that for you as a board is that they are referenced in the standard contract, that we're obliged to have a health inequalities action plan. We obviously have wider equality duties and things like that as well. And indeed, part of our system recovery journey has been an expectation that we will evidence the progress that we are taking on health inequalities. The strategy part of it, as I've already touched on, is that it's impossible to deliver some of the ambitions of our clinical strategy and indeed some of our wider partnership ambitions without being grounded in what we're doing in health inequalities. So it lines up in both of those ways. A key part of our response to that is the document that you have before you, which is the Health Inequalities Action Plan. We've already been doing some of the groundwork to kind of begin responding to this. We've done a build as we go kind of approach in the first year of my time at the Trust. So we have a good governance structure set in place. We now have a health equity committee that is reporting through the organisation to look at these areas, and also obviously my role and the ability that it has to kind of enhance the capacity of the organisation to respond. But the Health Inequalities Action Plan really captures where we're going next and is a communication for us within the organisation, but also to system partners, and also really something that sets the priorities for us in terms of what we'll go on to deliver. And particularly it's something that you need to have ownership of in terms of what we've set the direction on for the next year. As it says in the cover sheet, I'm not pretending that completing what we have in the plan fixes everything or indeed takes us where we are going in its entirety. There is a bit of a chicken and an egg in terms of building capacity in this, that we need to develop and work with communities to respond to health inequalities, but we also need to work with those communities to develop the plan for how we'll work with them. And you can see how that becomes something you can tie yourself up in. So the plan is very much a what are we going to do in the next 12 to 18 months whilst we build the relationships to set the longer term strategy. And it deliberately doesn't attempt to pretend we will do everything. It's very clear about what we intend to do first in that. So there are really two asks today. Obviously, the main one is captured in the paper is it's here for discussion and hopefully approval that we can move forwards and continue delivering it. But obviously the second I would flag is in the work that I guess everyone here has within your committees and areas is actually to just bear in mind health inequalities, that it's very easy. And again, I'll return to the outpatient example to finish, to look at a 7-8% outpatient rate and go at that, rather than look at the fact that there's a population with a 4% missed appointment rate and a population with a 12% missed appointment rate hidden underneath that. And those two populations require different responses in terms of what we do. So thank you, Chair. That's all I want to say and introduce.
Really good summary, Chris. Thank you. And it is a good paper. It really is. It summarises the issues very well. Tony?
Yeah, just Chair said it, really good paper. I love the way it's quite smart in terms of what it's focusing on. My question is a bit about what you've just described it in there about outpatients as an example. There's a lot of, when you go for the action plan, a lot of initiatives. And question is about, are we going to piggyback on the back of existing programs of work and activities to reduce that? Is that in your thinking? And the second question is outpatients is a really good one, because with Darcy and conversations we've had at TIB is maybe a completely different approach to outpatients, which is about outpatients out of hospital rather than being in hospitals, is maybe a new way of looking at it. And it's about linking up the pieces of work and activity to get to a certain destination. Is that in your thinking, Chris, in terms of capacity, resources and strategic alignment?
That's really helpful. Thank you. So I see my role as adding that capability to the organisation crudely. So in terms of the outpatient work, what you don't want is a separate health inequalities team trying just to do that. What you actually need to do is be inside the outpatient transformation work, which I am, so that that team takes on the approach through a health inequalities lens. So no, absolutely, I'm sat around that table we're working with. So it's the BI lead for outpatients that's doing the analytics rather than a health inequalities BI lead, and by that example. So definitely in terms of that. In terms of where we go next and the wider bit, again, that's about connecting us to things like the place-based partnership. And actually, as we move into doing things like the community work, the digital work, we need to look at those through a health inequalities lens. And again, I guess by way of example, I sit within the digital transformation work within whole system flow, and there's a whole amount of work there around digital poverty and digital access that we connect into through that. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Happy with that?
Yeah, very happy.
So please.
You've answered my first question, which was just, with the connection between flow and digital enablement. But then my next one was, are you getting the right level of development around the data infrastructure that you would need to support this, not just at this trust level, but actually at the system level and potentially beyond?
I think that's tricky at the moment, actually. I think it's changed. I would actually reflect, I think I'm being approached by the ICB for conversations on how we understand health inequalities, because our data maturity might be a little bit better at the moment. I think there are definitely gaps. My wish list would definitely be that we could connect the work that we're doing to the primary care data sets, and we aren't there yet as a system. But that would be very powerful in terms of us understanding that wider piece. I don't think anyone doesn't have that ambition. It's just the doing of it that's tricky.
If we think about some of our challenges with reside and even housing, being even connected to those data.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Thank you.
I'm going to go Brian, Tapston, Scott. On Karen. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Mike. Chris, I thought it was a great paper, so thanks so much for that. It was really great to read. I guess I've got a two-part question, really. One around research, and is there an appetite to engage in research, and how does this link with Jane's paper about the Trust's appetite for research to help inform this? And then secondly, thinking about one area of the patch, thinking about Barrow and the investment that's going in there with Team Barrow. There's a real call for the 4 universities to come together and look at research from a health and social inequalities perspective, but it would be silly not to feel joined up as partners in that arena, and just if that's been given consideration as part of the plan.
So the way, simple way. I would love us to be getting into the research in this space. I think it's a huge opportunity. I think it could be a real strength for this kind of organisation to be involved in that. Crudely, we focused on operationalising to start with, but definitely involved in that, talking to the Director of Public Health and obviously with yourselves from sort of university point of view. So I definitely see that's where we go in this. I think we've been in the setup phase. We haven't quite got there yet. But Major.
Jane, you want to
Yeah,
respond?
it was just the fact that at the end of Marisa Craig was going to say what's not included in this is that last week Mike and I had a meeting with exactly around how we might research. There was only a small number of us there. We were having a bigger stakeholder meeting in the near future to discuss that, because we're very much focused on clinical research in the R&D department. But Saxi had that conversation previously.
And I think just to note, of course, 2 universities in the room, but and as Brian acknowledged, 4 universities who are being engaged through the Barrow development work as well, all complementary strengths, I think, in this space as well, which is why it's important to have that broader collaboration.
So
Sorry to jump in.
No, separately, we had a meeting last week that had we've had all 4 universities there. Certainly, we've got more than 4 to deal with in the region. That was more around the education thing, but actually, I would suspect that will widen out.
Language there.
Or in our case, it was holidays we discussed. But
Okay, I'm going to bring us to the recommendations of the report, colleagues. Is there? Don't forget, I'm not taking us there now. Let me concentrate on the report. Issues that are related to that will probably follow outside of the meeting. Tabitha.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go to Tony's connectivity sort of assurance request that he was asking, and wanted to thank Chris as well for the work that he's done. So from a patient safety and quality in terms of system-wide, we are embarking on the population health program. So Chris' work really links with that, which helps us as an organization to improve around co-production and co-design with our patients. So I think there is a lot of connectivity with a lot of work that's already happening. And CQC, one of now the requirements, if they walk through the doors today, is around looking at our health inequalities, population health, patient engagement and involvement. So we are working very closely. So I just wanted to confirm that it really links to everything that we're doing.
Thank you. Scott?
It was just to bring to life your question, Tony. So I guess there were 2 circles. The place that they overlap on the Venn diagram would be in the outpatient program. I guess so people like me, very mechanistic, one-dimensional brains, go, yes, we should reduce DNAs. That's a great thing to do, and we should also think of disadvantaged people. So let's send everyone a text. And what people like Chris do is say, yeah, right, okay, that's good, Scott. But actually, so what we've done is, rather than create a separate health inequalities work stream, we've said we've got big programs of work, urgent care, outpatient care, which are many hundreds of thousands of patients a year. And it gets right into the nuances. So, for example, one of the pieces of work that we're doing in missed appointments is digging below in certain populations and in certain specialties, the actual wording in the text message. So what words does it use, and are those words that we could use differently to reach different target populations? So it's taken the art and science of inequalities work, the mechanics of the outpatient work, and getting those circles to overlap in the best way possible. So it's rather than creating a separate stream. That makes sense.
Right. Karen, please.
Oh, thank you. Just I guess just a point and then a couple of questions. The point around research, I think this absolutely lends itself to the kind of participatory action research model, and including that in the portfolio. And I know I have a conversation with Karen Stansfield coming up in the next couple of weeks, so really happy to take that forwards there. And then specifically to the action plan, thank you for that, Chris. Enormously succinct and focused, and something that we've just touched on before with regards to does this mean staff too? So we had a presentation as well earlier today, our patient experience presentation to board, that was actually made by a member of staff who was also a patient, is a patient. And it's just really clear with our demographic, you know, not all of our community will be members of staff, but pretty much all of our members of staff are part of the community. So, and also will reflect not all, but a number of those protected characteristics, and a number of them really fall into that space where we've made additional commitments as a trust to veterans, carers, those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and those with diverse gender identities. And I'm just wondering, first question is what the opportunities are to include a lens on staff in this, and particularly staff as enablers into some of the contacts with communities, because many of our staff will be living within in those communities. And the second question, again inspired by the patient experience story earlier today, is how does this plan sit in a system context where members of our community move between different organisations in health, from a health perspective? I know this is broader than health, absolutely, but how does it work in the system? Are others keeping pace, and so on?
Some of those issues that you raised, Karen, we look to Chris, but if they can be answered outside of the board, Chris,
Absolutely,
fine.
yeah. Well, absolutely, I guess, except the staff one. Are staff in or out of this plan?
Simply, they are alongside it, which is, apologies, it's neither answering both. The reason we do it like that is simply that we are set up very much in our sort of governance and way of thinking that we have a kind of a people strand and we have a kind of patient and community strand, and we can tread on each other's toes if we don't draw some line between them. So the work within the Health Inequalities Action Plan focuses very much on patient and communities. Obviously, the work that Ali leads focuses very much on the kind of the inclusion and equity for our staff. So that's where the planning sits, but the delivery of that obviously plays to the strengths of both. And you're absolutely right that we have a 10-year life expectancy gap between our domestic staff and our consultants on our wards in the same way that we do between Skirton and Kendal. So absolutely, we have to think about that in how we do it.
Okay, thank
Ali,
you.
But the last word on this item, if that's all right.
Yeah, it's just to do the triangulation. So we've had the conversations, haven't we, with occupational health and wellbeing, and Claire Hill is really keen to be linked into the work from the perspective of how we use our colleagues as ambassadors for wellbeing and how we support wellbeing in the organisation, but how we also use that as a way to support broader wellbeing and aligned to this kind of agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Colleagues, I'm conscious of time, that's why I'm pushing us along a bit now. So you know the quality committee has considered the report, nothing to escalate. We're asked to discuss it, I think we have, and then seek board approval. Does the board approve the action plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on then to governance and assurance. Review of the board assurance framework, October, November 24-25. Company Secretary, please.
Thanks, Chair. So essentially there are three elements to this report. So the first one is just a kind of review of progress on various risks that were escalating, form part of the board assurance framework from the last meeting in September. Nothing to escalate there, just visibility for the board. Moving to page sort of 409 of your pack, what are the kind of the issues and risks and mitigations that perhaps we need to focus on for this latest iteration of the board assurance framework? On page 409 of your pack, you've got a list of escalations and concerns that have been raised through the executives, together with an overview of issues that have got captured through the assurance committee work. There's perhaps just one that perhaps needs amplifying, which was from audit committee that Tony really raised before, and perhaps just for the minutes, we might just get from Tony just to kind of include that, so we've got that captured as well.
Yeah, just very briefly, touched upon it earlier. We had good conversation about the BAF, but communications and engagement was a key element because of the kind of a range of activity that's currently being undertaken and it's likely to increase. It's important that we get that in the right position, which I've experienced just recently in light of the recent announcements around reconfiguration we have. So we can avoid that kind of things being escalated or being managed in a different way to the expectations of what we set out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So the second sort of part of the kind of paper then touches on to potential changes to our board assurance framework, and both Ali and Karen have alluded to outcomes of the review of board assurance from risk 2, which I'll read on this occasion. There is a risk that the scale of transformation change will not be delivered without negative impact on engagement, morale, well-being, and productivity. There was a lengthy discussion at the People Committee. You'll see that on page 410 of the pack, there are a number of bullet points there that talk about some of the data points and some of the assurances and risks and escalations that have been made. Ali, I think I'll hand over to you just to kind of say a little bit more in terms of some of the detail behind that. But the view of the People Committee was that this is an escalating risk and that the likelihood score should change to 5, giving an overall score of 20 for that risk. But Ali, can I ask you to kind of speak a little bit further on that?
Just before you do, Ali, Karen did raise this colleague's memory early on in the meeting, so we don't have to repeat anything. Just
Yeah,
take it for the main
and a
part.
lot of this is replicated from what I covered in the board in the IPR. So we do know soft intelligence tells us that morale is at a low at this point in time across lots of areas of the organisation, linked to all of the elements that I discussed earlier. We know that we've got that issue in terms of sickness rates for mental health related stress and anxiety related absences are increasing, and there's a huge ask now on the occupational health team. We know we have got some hotspot areas across the organisation, and in reality there is a continuation of change which is going to continue to create uncertainty for colleagues. So that was the rationale for the recommendation at People Committee.
Take that here if that's right. So we're asked to support the increase of the score of the BAP from risk 2 to a score of 20. People happy to approve that? Yeah, thank you.
Again, on page 410 of the pack, there was a similar discussion regarding the financial challenges that the organisation is currently experiencing. What you've got on page 410 is a narrative that goes into some detail. It's consistent with messages that Chris has given both to the board and the Finance Committee in the most recent period about the mitigations and controls that are in place. At this moment in time, we are not recommending an increase in the score for the reasons set out in the report, but I will just draw your attention to the final paragraph on page 410, which references the pace and the need to go faster to meet our financial targets, and obviously there'll be ongoing assurance through the Finance Performance Assurance Committee in the next year, but no changes to score.
Board happy, Alan?
So could I just ask around, and I can understand the rationale for that with the impact of Firebreak I&I, and we can see that that is having an impact now on the pay and the non-pay costs. But in respect of the remaining CIP that's still in opportunity categorisation, there is going to need to be a significant proportion of that will be pay related because of the proportionality of what we spend our money on, and the time scales to deliver against that. I'm just wondering whether this year it is right to keep that as it is, or whether we should be increasing that score on that basis.
And that was very much the discussion that took place at Finance Committee. In sort of preparing that narrative, Chris has written to NHS England and provided a comprehensive kind of update. And we took that as kind of the basis of the narrative that's in there. Perhaps, Chris, it might be helpful if you can respond and give some additional context around that.
I think, I mean, Ali raises perfectly legitimate issues, but what I think we should do, we need to understand some of the announcements from that might relate to the remainder of the year. The budget statement last week. We also, I think, I alluded to earlier, I said that we'd look at month 7 and do a detailed reforecast, and I think that would be the point at which if we confirm the position, hopefully with a bit more context about any mitigations and how we would manage that adverse position should it arise. But I take the point. I think I hope the board's heard the level of risk that we've got in the position, and we have an opportunity to formally reconsider it.
What we don't want to do is fall into the governance trap of the board replicating the discussions that have already been held by the subcommittee. So Tony, I look to you here.
Yeah, absolutely. That conversation, and it was raised, that particular issue. But for the reasons that Chris articulated, we concluded it's a little bit earlier. Let's see how things pan out. But let's be under no doubt, as I said in my summary, for Annie, the SIPs is probably the biggest thing at the minute. That's just kind of compromising our progression.
Thanks, Sally.
And then just lastly, Mike, on page 411 of the pack, just kind of a forward look to what we might see in the next period. Mentioned already general practice, collective action. There is a risk on the risk register around that, and there's been an update already to the Finance and Performance Committee. In likewise, potential impact of medical rate card changes. A little bit too early to say what the impact is, but there's additional work going to be undertaken in the next period. Other than that, there's nothing else that I wish to raise with the board at this time.
Just a point, just in the bit where it talks about the FGH ITU, can we just be really careful with the language that we don't use temporary closure of FGH ITU? I know it says level 3 at the end, but I know it's semantics, but it's really important because
Make that correction.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lou.
Thanks, Luke. Okay, then we're happy to note the contact. Sorry, we're happy to accept. Oh, sorry, Sarah.
Thank you. It's a question just because we only see it as a composite when it comes to board. We only see relevant sections of the BAF when it comes to the Assurance Committee. So this is the first time I've seen the other sections. I had a question actually on the partnership section, but there's a similar question on the quality section, which is where under the gaps in controls and assurance, we've got actions which we see as helping to address those gaps or mitigate those gaps. So under quality, for example, there's one around monitoring quality impact assessments, and that's noted as completed on the basis Quality Committee received a quarterly report or report in September, whereas actually I think that's work in progress. It was the first report and there's more elevated risk now sitting in the system. So I think that's ongoing. The same with partnership. There's an action which relates to system-wide clinical strategy and the fact we've had a session at board around the Strasis work. And I don't take assurance from that. I think that's again work in progress. That actually clinical reconfiguration is a much longer term project with a lot of risk sitting around it. So I think we just need to be careful about thinking we close something off because we've had a session on it or a paper on it, and so we just need to consider that.
If we can kick this to audit committee, that'll be a really helpful discussion, Sarah. So getting the form and content of the board assurance framework is a challenge without making it unwieldy. So we're doing some work with the internal auditors that they're doing their regular work. We have regular discussions with them about how we benchmark with others and getting that narrative right about, well, has it been done? Are we assured? So I'd like to take that to audit committee about the form and content. So we get the information content suitable for board, so you just give that crisp narrative and that certainty that it's been agreed and next steps and so on.
Yeah, and I think because that partnership section then actually doesn't go to any of the assurance committees, so we only see it here. So we need to probably again audit be clear about what that process is as well.
Okay. Yeah, chair of audit, incoming chair of audit, happy to accept that. Yeah, Sarah Courtney, happy. Yeah, okay, board's happy to recommend that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is that your report?
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, colleagues, I'm conscious of time. Are we happy then to accept it, plus those recommendations we put through the board of changing score to 20?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. We've two other papers now before we end the thing. One is on R&D, an update report. We have to note the content. If you've got anything outside of the content, can I suggest then that you speak to Jane outside of the meeting? And can I, when we get to item 85, Susie, Jane, I know you've got to go, so please pass out condolences. You've not left your notebook, have you, Susie?
I'm leaving dinner, coming back.
Towel protecting your seat. And then if I come on item 85, the green plan update, it says, you know, just preparing for the recommendations, acknowledge the report, but any feedback is to be sent to David Sanderson, and there's an email address attached to that. So again, I'm just preparing it. I don't want a long discussion on these two items. If we do need a discussion, have them with the authors outside of the board. Okay, over to you.
Thanks, I'll be really brief. I'll take the papers read. And just sort of 4 things I wanted to highlight. So I think it's fair to say that the research and development team continue to develop and move forward the portfolio of research that we've offered within the trust after a very difficult years. And credit for this was really due to the leadership of Andy Lancaster and Tim Gatherell. We've seen a real field change with them in place, and the staff who work in the service have delivered a huge amount compared to what we were doing that time ago. So just want to acknowledge that really. We are getting to the point at which we have to really consider further expansion. The trials we've got, even those that close, have a maintenance period so we're sort of reaching the elastic limit of the people we've got in place. So if we want to continue taking further studies, they will need to consider recruitment. And that obviously is just to note that it's a challenge with the current right scrutiny that we're undertaking. Real notable success, we've been involved, or we are involved in a respiratory trial around idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. We were picked to the post by 2 days to be the first people to get a patient globally, but we're really fantastic on that. And I think that's quite notable for, I guess, what we could just kind of call ourselves a district general hospital as opposed to a really city centre, major urban research centre. So I think it really is notable. And the team are really thrilled that we've now got a better space, that they're having some work done for the RNI site to allow them to undertake their patient contacts for research. So it was that, and I won't go back into the conversations about the meetings we're having. So that's it from me.
Just to add thanks to our university partners for helping us develop this, and this is an ongoing project. And then just again to say, we'll look at some point to have a board development session around R&D as well, get it to our schedules. But any questions or comments around the report itself? We're happy to note it at this point. Jane, thank you. UHMB Green Plan update. Progress against Trust Green Plan. Chief Operating Officer, please.
Thank you. So just to pull out a couple of highlights, I guess to start with, apologies not being a strong word, but the statement on page 419 around progress despite the lack of funding is an unfortunate turn of phrase. So I think it's rather that wasn't there, if I'm honest, because there is some great work being done. The update is not assurance. It's, I guess, because it's qualitative. It doesn't give the action plan with a Gantt chart and timelines in it. It's really there as a narrative update on some of the things that have happened in this reporting year. I think the progress, as far as I see it, are around the green plan is now not just something that sits in the bailiwick of the estates team. There's been some really good progress made in the facilities side. So there's some really innovative, quite controversial, interestingly, but some innovative thinking in low carbon food products for patients and colleagues. The biodiversity work's really quite impressive. So I think on the 28th of November, if you're interested, of the morning, there's 250 trees arrive on site here for planting, given by Natural England. That follows on the biodiversity work and the BioBlitz that's been done. So some good, noble, meaningful work in this space. I guess in the more kind of mechanistic sense, I think Chris and I certainly are clear from the capital perspective that if you were asking us for an assurance that a net zero aspiration for the trust is in any way affordable in our capital infrastructure, the answer would be no. And so I guess there's a conversation for us to have at the appropriate point, strategically, where is our crossbar in terms of the journey towards net zero or the most minimal levels we could achieve. That's not to say we won't try, of course. So something in there for everyone, I'm sure. Happy to take any questions, but more importantly, there'll be people with a variety of expertise around the table. And so if there is anything that you think is missing or could be augmented, then do drop Dave an email.
Please, any comments? It is not an assurance paper, as Scott rightly says. It's just really for information about where we are at the moment. So,
I was sort of, sorry, I was just thinking, your point is, it's not an assurance paper. So if we have a green plan and strategy, at what point is there an assurance paper, I suppose, around progress towards that?
I don't know, Sarah. In fact, if I'm really honest, I'm not even sure which subcommittee this goes to, which is shameful actually on my part. So yeah, I don't know. So let me think about that and think about
Paul. So, this won't entirely answer the question, but I'll just remind everybody, because there is a reporting requirement for the green plan. It's in our annual report. So the annual reporting manual, which I think that kind of Nick and I, there are different narratives that we need to put in. So the production of the green plan and kind of the data gets put in there. So that is kind of, you know, where the assurance is. So there is a formal reporting there, but in terms of kind of, does this sit in a program of work within, it doesn't. But it's helpful from that kind of point of view. Is have you got a plan? Yes. Are you even going to report on it? Yes, we do. It's in our annual report, and these updates kind of have that cycle. And it's really a question as to whether or not you think this is an area where you need to seek ongoing assurance.
So I think reading the paper, it suggests that there's an NHS target of net zero by X date, 2035 or 2040, I think, yeah. And at a point in time, the trust will need to, after all of our life, not life, hopefully lifetimes, but tenures, the progress we are making towards that and what measures we're putting in place. Just thinking about your point, Scott, about actually, can we achieve that with our current estate? What would that look like?
we
Question
can,
about-
we can with the current state, to be honest.
No, but
the
new
NHP
hospital programme,
approved
for example. So,
to be carbon neutral, the new
Yeah.
hospital.
so
we
at
will
a
achieve
point,
it then.
yeah. I think the point is we need to come
Yeah.
up with an assurance framework
Well,
around it.
can we just differentiate the company secretary's advice that we don't get operational here? What is the assurance that we are seeking as a board? Is it around patient safety? Is it around quality of care? Is it around the budget? So that will help us then decide what is the right committee. If this is an operational development of the trust, then we need to be clear that it's out with the unitary board's area of responsibility. But there is some ambiguity, because if it's in the annual report, then it is within our remit. But I would like to know, for assurance purposes, what are we seeking to assure? That might help the subcommittee.
Yeah.
So I'm going to propose that Scott take that away, perhaps speak to David and company secretary's advice, and then come back to us.
The reporting requirements are quite specific, right? So we can use that as a starting point, because a lot of them potentially are operational. Yeah, in terms of what people are happy to take that as an action.
And then, yeah, I'll be in a second, then we need to know specifically what assurance we are seeking. The board could probably discuss that, or the relevant subcommittee could. And then we can start looking at dates and things, but I don't want us to become too operational when we don't need to. And I'd like to know if it's in the assurance, what exactly are we measuring. So we just take out of the minutes that this is not an assurance paper. It's a good discussion thing. Aaron?
I think you've covered off my point there, Mike. So in the interest of time, I won't add anything further.
Ali?
Yeah, I'm just, there's two elements to the national targets, aren't there? There's carbon footprint and there's carbon footprint plus. So one thing, so the first is the things that are direct under our control, and then there are things that we make decisions about that have an indirect effect. And I guess it might just be helpful for us to separate those two things out when we have reporting in future, so we can see what we're doing in respect of the two targets that we've got to work towards.
So that's the nature. So I think so we've got, so the first strategy we mentioned having a green strategy. We've got a green strategy. I guess the space for check, challenge, assurance would be, does our green plan over the next 1, 2 and 3 years take us to achieving our green strategy? And if not, do we need to change our strategy? That'll be best done in the relevant subcommittee. So as an action, if I work with Paul to report back to the board next time, which subcommittee it goes to do that, then that'd be acceptable to the board.
Happy colleagues look at it that way. Sarah, thank you. Well spotted. Okay, we've got 86. You've got the monitoring register, we've got the schedule of business, no urgent business being brought to our attention. Colleagues, I'm going to close the meeting then at 12 o'clock. We'll reconvene at 12:45 for the private board. Could I just ask that the executives, Lou and Paul, can you just remain in the room for a few minutes, please? And could I ask the non-exec directors, if you don't mind giving us just a few minutes?
Okay, yeah.